gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you've had a bit of a coffee break, you're powered up and ready for our next session, because this is going to be a great one. We're talking about the Thought Leadership Roundtable, in which we're going to be focused on building capacity for the future. And we've been hearing about how the growth and the change in demographic of passengers, we need to build capacity. So please welcome on stage my esteemed panel of experts to help me negotiate and navigate through this. Please welcome Susan Donis, the Chief Information Officer for Qantas. Please welcome Lien van Duyn, the Vice President of Security Services for KLM. Sebastian Fabre, the Vice President of the Airline and Airports Portfolio for SITA, and also Simon Wilcox, Head of Transformation, Automation, Innovation, all the Asians at London Heathrow. Big round of applause, please. Thank you. So we're going to be focusing on some of the themes for this conference, for the and especially capacity building. We heard earlier on about this idea of a new airport in Warsaw and the importance of building, and we saw the growth and the amount of people that are taking the advantage of flying. And how do we do it, I guess? Because we've got a lot of technological advances going forward, but how do we create movement, create space? What do we do? Simon, let's start with you because you're furthest away from me. What's Heathrow looking at?
So I'm a firm believer that the technology is there. And in fact, this morning we've already heard there's lots of technology that exists outside of our industry. For me, it's about how do we come together? How do we collaborate to challenge ourselves in the way that we operate today? And whilst the rules, regulations, and the structure of our industry has served us incredibly well since it was created in the 40s, 50s, and beyond, actually, my sense is it's not fit for purpose for the future. So actually, how do we come together to challenge ourselves in terms of how we operate and create a combination of people, process, and technology coming together? And I think there's some really exciting things out there. We're already starting to see some new innovation, some new pilots, some new trials coming up in terms of biometrics is a theme, no doubt, we'll talk about. And indeed, we've heard this morning, there's huge opportunity there in order to do something different.
So, Sebastian, is the technology there then, do you think? Are we just not using it well enough? Are we not talking together? Because that's something else that we heard earlier on, that different bits of the industry, the same industry, but different bits are just not communicating together.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with Simon. The technology is there. The technology is reliable. It's a question of getting organized to use it. We were discussing that earlier also with Lien, the fact that we have points of experimentations. We can prove that biometrics works to process passengers. We can prove that artificial intelligence works to optimize turnaround time. Question is how we bring all the players together, airlines, airport, governments, and can deploy things in large scale. Today we've got lots of local deployments. A number of airports, airlines have done things in one airport, in one area. But when it comes to having an end-to-end solution that allows a passenger to travel from one destination to another one through maybe 2 different airlines, 3 different airports, today it's not there, right?
Lien, so in that case, I know security screening is a big deal, and that's a part of the travel experience that isn't seamless at the moment. Do you feel there are changes? What are they?
Yeah, I think the changes are necessary as well, also to deal with the growing number of passengers. And to deal with that flow, we need the technology to help us with it. We need a more seamless and frictionless flow with passengers. And I totally agree with Patrick and Simon that the technology is there, but there are too few airports and airlines that are experimenting now. And so there are multiple technological solutions. For instance, at Schiphol Airport, we are experimenting with Canadian and Dutch government with the known travel digital identity, which uses a certain type of technology, but also working with the US government on pre-clearance to the US, where the Customs and Border Protection uses their own technology. And at Schiphol, we are also working with the Dutch government, what we call seamless flow. So the technology is there, we need to do that. And I'm a firm believer that that will also enhance the security level.
Susan, how is Qantas dealing with this? Data is a big deal. Everybody's quite worried about what happens with their data. I know you've been looking at this area especially?
Yeah, well, I think I just want to pick up on a couple points that my colleagues here have said. One is with Simon, which is sometimes you have to look outside the industry to get ideas of what we can do better. And just kind of on that point is when you look at just the almost symphony that needs to happen to get everything and everyone to the same place in a seamless, but also in a happy way. People are not just traveling A to B just to get there. It's all part of the experience. So when you think about that, you need the government, you need the airport, you need the airline, you need air traffic control, and it all needs to happen seamlessly and beautifully. So when you look at other industries, for example, open banking, and you look at all the data that needs to be connected across open banking and how complex and emotional all of that has been. And then you look at the airline and you think, actually, we have the opportunity to leapfrog what they're doing in open banking. And I'd almost say if we don't leapfrog it, we actually have I would say the ability to kind of go backwards, because we were talking too about having to enter in data 5 or 6 times. That's going to frustrate a lot of people. So if you look at kind of that whole process, I think that the data is really important. On the flip side too, and I think it came out in, maybe it was David's speech earlier today, which is at the end of the day, we are humans. And we don't completely act in rational ways, the way the data would tell us to. So even though we say we'll do something, we don't necessarily do that. And so in retail, there's a lot of work that's done around all of this psychological behavioral economics. And then you look at how people behave, and there was a really good study done. It's a famous study about the jelly beans, and they gave people a choice of 24 jelly beans, and when they got the 24 jelly beans, they had a certain amount that they bought the jelly beans. But if you gave them 6 jelly beans, they actually bought 30% more. So this idea of curated experiences, I think, is really interesting for us as well. So I think we live in this really interesting time. And then on that too is, I think, as you look at the data as well, going back to the data is big tech companies, they've looked a lot at the A/B testing. So instead of spending time doing tons and tons of analysis, they just kind of launch things out there. And each time they just ask, is A better than B? If A is better than B, then we'll do A. And we constantly just do the reiteration. And what you practice is doing things really quickly. So again, it's data-based, but it's based on not necessarily having everything perfect and being able to understand how people will behave versus how the data might say they might behave.
I see what you mean, and people are, from my own experience, I know I'm quite irrational, and I think I'm going to do one thing, do something completely different. Simon, Heathrow has been working a lot to collect data. I'm always being asked, tap the smiley face or the sad face, whatever. What happens, how are you using that data? What specifically have you done at Heathrow to make the whole passenger journey more pleasant?
So over the last number of years, we've been obviously collecting a lot of data, as you mentioned. One of the things that we did actually a number of years ago now was just co-locate a lot of our control rooms and operations rooms into one in terms of our airport operations centre. Leveraging that data, but having the decision makers in the room to be able to use it in order to make better, to improve the passenger experience or to identify where there's going to be issues on the day, and then how do we use that to get minimize the impact to aircraft turnaround or minimize the misconnections for passengers. Because I often think there's, you can over-collect data. And data has a value in terms of using it, but data is also a cost of storing it, protecting it. So there's definitely a piece about making sure that we collect the right stuff at the right time and use it to make the right decisions. So we've been using a lot of energy to understand exactly what do we need and when do we need it in the journey. And over the last 3 years, I've been leading our passenger automation program. Not about automating passengers at all, but about making it a more seamless, frictionless journey. And that's been centered around introducing more self-service and more options to customers, because the IATA Global Survey says customers want choice. they want to personalize their journey, they want to be in control of their journey. So we've been introducing more and more self-service products. And in a little over 18 months, we've had 25 airlines now using self-service bag drop at Heathrow, with over 200 self-service bag drops in operation, which is a phenomenal deployment. But linking back to some of the points my colleagues here have mentioned, just how inconsistent this industry sometimes can be. 25 airlines, 25 almost different ways of doing the same thing, and that's really frustrating for a customer. And the duplicating of information, putting data in, you're asked to check in online at home, you then get to the airport, you then check in at a kiosk again because you've been told you've got to print a bag tag, and you go through the same process and you get the boarding pass, and then that's just duplicating effort. So for me, yes, getting the right data, but let's challenge ourselves to actually remove some of those processes in the first place, because the way that we've done them doesn't mean that we have to do it in the future.
Sebastian, have you been successful in removing some of those processes? What have you done at CETA?
So removing processes and also I think sharing data, which is I think if you look at the capacity challenge that we've got in our industry. Obviously, we need a lot of data to do that, to improve turnaround time, to better manage disruption. And we can see that our industry is not necessarily well equipped at this stage in terms of data. When we survey all our customers, CIOs of airlines and airport, obviously we need information about accurate information and real-time information about flight arrival time, around passenger tracking, but interestingly enough, the number one actually challenge that airlines and airport reports to is in terms of being able to count passengers still, in 2019. So that gives you a feel for, okay, we are able to do very sophisticated things on one hand, but on the other hand, we do lack some very basic data everywhere. And but on the positive side, I think the industry has moved a long way from discussing, that was 2 years ago. Every time you were discussing about we need data to improve efficiency, the first actual discussion you ended up with was who it belongs to in terms of ownership of the data. And that's probably a gift from our Gartner of this world, saying, data is the next oil, and everybody thinking, okay, I need to monetize the data. And I think our industry has moved a long way from that to now thinking business process issues. Okay, I need to reduce the turnaround time, I need to improve the passenger experience. What is the data we need? We put things together, and then we discuss how we actually share the data. And I think the focus nowadays, which to me is very positive, is more around data privacy. How do you make sure that you're compliant with the regulation? How do you make sure that the passenger feel comfortable to share data? And how you actually give the control, the steering wheel to the different players in the industry to share data. And that's at CETA, that's something we are spending a lot of time, the trust framework, so that people feel at ease to exchange data, to share data, so that it can be used and harnessed to actually deliver better efficiency and higher capacity.
We're going to expand on that a little bit, but I'm just surprised that there are gaps, the gaps that you mentioned in, as you say, 2019. What are those gaps? How can you, with all the information, with everything we're watched all the time, what are the gaps that what do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's a question of, in our industry, a lot of people have data around the same thing. So if you take a very good and simple example, flight arrival time, right? An airport might have a version or a view of that flight arrival time. The airline will have also a prediction of that. Then you're going to have the air navigation service provider who's going to track that aircraft. And that's a lot of information, a lot of data, and what is actually the most accurate information, right? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, something that we found in CETA is that if you want to measure that information and say, okay, so something we've been working on with the Shanghai Airport, which is being able to predict when a flight will arrive. If you measure and you collect the data, you actually end up being accurate 30 minutes in advance, really accurate. But when you actually predict that data using artificial intelligence, you can be precise up to 6 hours in advance.
Wow.
So it's a question of, where is the best data, and then using the best technology to actually be as accurate as possible.
So at the moment, there's a lot of duplication in that case.
I've got just maybe even a more basic example of where the gaps are today. Whilst at Heathrow, we've got 84 airlines that operate out of Heathrow, and we get a fair amount of reasonable data from the majority, but not the all. And the most basic sense is that I don't know that the passengers are coming. I don't know the volume of people, yet I've got to manage a security queue and create an experience for putting people through securely, but in less than 5 minutes. Now, from a customer's perspective, they're horrified by that, because they're like,
I just want to ask, how on earth can you not know that? You know how many people are taking flights, so how on earth?
Airlines don't always share that data for commercial sensitive purposes.
Come back to that in a minute.
But actually, ultimately, it's impacting the customer. Now, we have a great team of people who manage our security forecasting, and we use a lot of historical data. That means that we actually, our accuracy on forecast is between 1 or 2% on average, there or thereabouts. But actually, if I just knew the volume of people traveling and which flights they were connecting from with greater accuracy, I could absolutely collaborate to create a better experience for that customer.
So you need that from the airlines. Lean.
Shall I react to that?
I think you've got to, really, don't you?
No, when it comes to data collection and the huge amount of data all the airlines have, it comes with a huge responsibility as well, and also with a commercial sometimes advantage. But we need to share the relevant data with each other to work together. So that's an assignment we, as an airlines, need to take up on our shoulders. But there also needs to be the right system so you can share that without compromising your own data security, and also to get back, you said, get back to the passenger, where it's all what we're all working for, to remain, to have a high level of trust in us as an industry, but also as an airline, so that the passengers know that their data, they can trust us in collecting and keeping track of their data.
So is that one then for your security teams, your cybersecurity teams, or is that one for governments? How do you square that then? Because you feel that I don't want to give too much of my data away, as you can say, people can monetize it. But on the flip side, if you want a quicker experience, a more seamless experience, you kind of give a little bit more to get a little bit back.
Well, you have to make good arrangements, and that's what we're doing now with the Dutch government, for instance, with all the government bodies, with the airport, with KLM. But you need to take the first step, and I think the technology is there, so it can be done. But from an industry that's more or less always been fairly traditional, it's a culture-wise difficult step to make. So that's, I think, my explanation why you see so few airports and few airlines and few governments really experimenting with the new technology and making sure that you collect the data, but keep the integrity of the data as well intact.
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the reasons we're actually here for the next couple of days, as well as IATA. Alexandra referred to it at the beginning, too, is how can we better set up the APIs and what data we can share, and how does that get shared, et cetera. So I think that's why a lot of people are even here, is we're working on that, and that's kind of these open skies initiative that he talked about, or even the One ID. All of these things are set up to do that. It's just a matter of how do we do that in a way that is not just efficient and effective, but it's also as trusted as it can be.
Is it for Qantas? Is it a priority? Because when we hear Lean talk about experimenting, that makes me feel anxious that people are thinking about experimenting. Okay, we've got amazing technology, but experimenting with data is worrying for a lay person like me. What's the kind of Qantas thinking of this? What are you putting your energy?
I mean, I think a lot of maybe the better way of explaining it is more around innovation. innovation. So Qantas has been an airline that's been known for innovation for a long time. So I don't know how many people know, but Qantas actually had the first business class. The business class started with Qantas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The other thing is, this is very exciting, but we also invented the evacuation, the safety, the slides that come out as well.
Thank you to Qantas. Thank you.
Exactly. So I think in terms of this is all about the innovation in terms of how do we test these ideas that help everybody and bring everybody along with us versus it being done to us. It's being done with the passengers.
Can I just
Yes,
react to that?
please,
Because
yeah.
you were saying about I want to get rid of the notion that we're experimenting with data of passengers, but experimenting with the processes, how to evolve that. That's interesting. But getting back to the passenger, it's also interesting, like Simon said, what the passenger experiences are. Because what we see now with the trials what we have been doing, that some passengers don't find it reassuring that they come up to a booth, they have their biometrics taken, and the booth just opens. How can that be secure? So we need to educate also and tell passengers what we are doing, that it's even more secure than what we're doing now. And also manage the expectations of the passengers when it comes to the security level and what we are doing in the background to get them on a secure flight.
To get them through it. But whose responsibility is that then? Because it feels like it's a collaborative thing. And again, like Susan says, that's why we're all here to discuss it. But is it the media to explain that it's okay, you've got these little chips in your passports? Or is it the government, or is it the airport?
I don't think it's one party. I think it is definitely a collaboration. I think there's a huge amount about reassuring customers. I think what the data we're talking about already largely exists, but it's in pockets. It's held by the government or the airline or the airport or a provider. Actually, it's about how do we use that. So in many respects, we're not asking a customer to share more data. We're just asking to use it in a better way to serve them, to create a more seamless experience. But I think there's definitely a case of how do you get that message across in a way that reassures, that says it's being done responsibly. Ultimately, it's the customer's data. So, how do we put them in control of it? That's the utopia for me. And I think, it's like linking back to a conversation we had earlier, we shouldn't be trying to create bespoke solutions for this industry. I think this industry can pioneer and can drive and innovate to create a better experience. But a lot of this already exists in other sectors. The financial services are doing a lot of work in this space. So actually, how do we cross-industry collaborate in order to create a better experience?
So in that case, Sebastian, how do you see the role of a data service provider? Because I know you've got some examples, some tangible examples.
Yeah. So I think our role has evolved significantly over the past years. So historically we were sending messages, point-to-point communication, a big web of exchanges. Nowadays, I think we have to become providers of information. And to me, this is actually threefold. Obviously, you need operational data. Where is this bag? Where is this passenger? The gate where an aircraft will arrive, and things like this. We are bringing a lot of. We need to bring a lot of intelligence on top of that. Intelligence, meaning why have we got delays with that turnaround? Doing some analytics, analyzing, the key factors of improving turnaround time, or also doing benchmark. That's something that actually airlines and airports are asking a lot nowadays. How do they compare, so that to understand what is the ultimate goal or the KPI I need to reach. And the third thing is probably a more environmental or all the information around weather, aircraft information, and things like this. So basically, our role nowadays is to take the data in those three categories, make it available to the people when we have it, create data when we don't have it. Let's take a very simple example. If you want to, as a passenger, know how long you're going to wait at a gate or at a security point, Some airports are actually publishing this information, but some airports are not. So we are actually investing into sensors and cameras to make this information available, create it really, or when it comes to airport maps, that's also something that we are doing right now to have this information available for the community. So create data. And the third mission is the one we were discussing, is to create a framework, a trusted framework, so that people can exchange data and control the data exchange. So you were mentioning about the load factor, which is indeed something that is very, very important in the airline industry. You don't want your competitor to know your load factor. So when we exchange data about baggage, which is one way to actually guess the load factor, we make sure that the airlines decide who reads my data, who has access to my data, how much of this data do I share. So really putting a trust framework, giving the control to the people who contribute data so that they feel okay, safe, and secure to exchange data. So I think with the three things like this, we can actually fuel all the automation, all the business process, all the AI, and really improve technology.
So Lynn, then, how do you, from your perspective then, for KLM, how do you improve on that trust, and how do you, in, say, the next 5 or 10 years, what can you see as something that you would ideally like to change so that customers do feel really confident and happy?
I think that, and that's also the reason why we're here, to get more of industry standards in place. Because we see now that there are a lot of differences when it comes to different airports, different airlines, and procedures. For instance, at Schiphol Airport, we now use the computed tomography, the CT scanners, so you can leave all the liquids and laptops in your hand baggage. And the biggest task the security personnel now has is telling the passengers to leave everything in the bag. Because they are so drilled, they are so accustomed to taking everything out. So the differences between the different airports and airlines are too big. We need to close the gap and get some standards in place, I think, and also be more open about what we are doing and how we are innovating and are elevating the security standard. Because that's something a lot of passengers don't fly every week. So if they fly once a year or twice a year, we have to reach them and tell them before they get on their journey so they know what to expect about security measures and what they can see and feel, but also what's been done in the background.
Susan, is that then a frustration for you, for Qantas as well then, that there's such discrepancies between Schiphol, because Heathrow, of course, you do have to take out your liquids and your mascara and all the rest of it?
Well, what I would say is I think that more and more as we work as an industry together, we're starting to get more kind of aligned, and there's this kind of ability, as people learn from one airport or one area, they kind of bring it with them because they're flying from one place to the other. So a lot of that kind of comes with them. But I do have to say there's a lot of fragmentation around policy and how things are done. Like even, we were talking about this earlier, you still have to get out, put some information in, then put the same information in again. Even when you go through security, if you're transiting from one point to the other, you've got to do everything all over again. So you've got to go through security and go through all of these things again. And so I think even as an industry, it would be great. We've built up a lot of knowledge and a lot of best practice through many, many years, 100 years of really doing this. But what ends up happening is we build on top of versus having a big fresh look and saying, actually, is there anything we can simplify, and how can we think of taking this down to what we really need to do, to the 5 steps? Much easier to remember 5 steps than to remember 25. So that's a lot of what we're looking at doing too, is how can we simplify things in collaboration with all of our ecosystem here as well.
So Simon, how do you make sure that the one airport is the same, that it's not yet, but I know that you're looking at it. But then you've got all the other considerations that different countries, different nations, different, we're looking at European Union, different Schengen, whatever. There are so many different jigsaws to this. How do you make it one easy process?
That is a huge challenge, of course, but I think there's a minimum baseline. You will have, there's lots of commonality that already exists throughout the globe and within this industry. I think there's more we can now do with the increasing technology that's coming in. So we mentioned the CT scanners being used at Schiphol. We're installing them now at Heathrow, so you will be able to keep your laptops and liquids in, just to confirm. But actually, I think there's a lot that says, as an industry, we have to collaborate, and as Lean says, we have to come together, we have to share what we're doing, and I couldn't agree more with that, because I think that's how we're going to get the consistency and standardization. And we can work with IATA and ACI and ICAO to help give us the frameworks around it, but the content of that will only come from airports, airlines, governments coming together, because we've shaped this industry. Therefore, we will continue to shape it for the future. And certainly from a Heathrow perspective, we're really proud to be working closely with IATA in the One ID, the biometrics piece, and more broadly as well in terms of the Next initiative. And we've helped shape that. We're going to continue to share what we're doing because whilst there is some commercial tension, say between Heathrow and Schiphol, really when we've got a huge amount that we can learn from each other. And actually, if we can come together, that customer, which ultimately we're here all to serve, will have a better experience. And I believe, my belief is that we can make it a secure industry, but we can also make it a more competitive from a cost perspective as well by doing things in a different way.
Well, we heard from Nick earlier on saying that the customer's voice is getting louder, and personally as a customer, I'm very happy to hear that. And we heard also that the demographic is aging as well. Sebastian, what's one of the biggest challenges that you see in the foreseeable future as we all fly more, as we all get a bit older? What's on your books? What's on your radar?
Yeah, well, so maybe just stepping back a bit in terms of passenger adoption to new technology. From our survey, so every year we run a surveys to passengers at airport, and actually the level of adoption and the willingness of the passengers to adopt self-service typically is really high. Okay. Typically, passengers prefer to use self-service than talking to people. They find it less stressful, interestingly enough. That's what they say. So 92% of people prefer to go through self-service device, gates or self-boarding device than having to do having to deal with a counter and somebody that might not be that well on that day. So I think that's encouraging that people are willing to adopt new technology. If you look also at the adoption of biometrics, more than 90% of the passengers are telling we are happy to use our biometrics to board and things like this. So I think globally on the passenger side we are okay. Now to your point about the fact that there will always be cases and people who will not be able to use those systems, I think it is really, we have to plan for that. We have to plan systems, backup systems, exceptions, handling lanes for these people, that's for sure. And probably here robotics and these kind of things will bring a lot, because you can expect that the shape of the airport, you will not have those big spaces with counters, and so there's going to be a lot of automation, but you have to plan for backup systems. That could be a robot coming to those people or people who can take care of this. So to me, it's not really a big challenge. It's more not forgetting that you always have to have another way of doing it in case you have to face this.
I was going to say, because as the population ages, you've got, maybe slightly older people not taking up. I personally, I don't want an app for everything. I've got limited storage on my phone. My phone's going to explode soon. I can't download another app. Yeah. And I know that if I'm flying with one airline, download this app. If I'm flying with another airline, download that app. I'm struggling with the amount of memory on my phone. But you've also got older people who potentially don't want all of that on their, on one gizmo. You've got younger people that absolutely desperately want it and expect it. How do you balance the two, Aline?
Well, the balancing act is difficult, but you see that the number of people that depend on digital systems and don't care about sharing their data is growing. So we have to, and I think it's also a necessity to keep the passenger flow going. So we have to jump in on that, but at the same time, it opens up different vulnerabilities we haven't seen before, and also to make sure that we keep the trust of the passenger. We need to think about the possible scenarios, and we've all seen some examples not that long ago that the huge responsibility we have to not only collect but also keep that data secure is massive if it goes the wrong way. And we need to, we shouldn't be naive in that sense, because we have so much data as airlines and airports together. So we're not only interested for guys that want to earn a few euros or dollars, or activists, but we're also interesting for nation states. And we need to be prepared and need to have robust processes and technical views on the way we treat the data to keep the trust of the passenger.
And when it comes to, since we're touching upon technology, Susan, we've got so much of it with virtual reality and all the rest of that. Is there going to come a time when actually we don't need to travel around so much? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think that the virtual reality and some of these technologies actually augment and make things a lot more like a personalized experience. So it actually helps bring an even richer travel experience. I can give you a few examples. There was a wonderful woman, her name is Michaela Jade. She started this company called InDigital in Australia, but it's being used everywhere. And what she did is she kind of created an app that allowed you to kind of hover over something, and then if there was a sign there, all of a sudden something would pop out and it would talk to you about the story, about the indigenous culture. And the wonderful thing about this, beyond just the virtual reality and the augmentation, is she got indigenous children to actually create the stories. So it created this wonderful ecosystem. And then also, if you think of, either a sporting event, or in my case, watching the fireworks in Sydney, when you're there, there's nothing quite like being there and your heart pumping and everything going, but you miss the commentary and what's going on. And I'm usually really far away, so I can't see. So this kind of mixture of the both is really, really interesting. And then also, if you think of elderly people or even younger people, these authentic experiences where you can connect, that's what the social networks and then the internet is all about, is connecting, is you have this opportunity now to connect with even language. So you can go to these remote villages and through some of the technology understand what people are saying and communicating with them. How amazing is that? To be able to have that kind of intimate conversation with people. I just think it's almost like the early explorers, that you can almost, take yourself back in time and fast forward in time as well. So I think it's going to be really creating these amazing experiences.
And I don't think it's a question that we need to choose, because we are so hungry for connectivity. So it's you can see in a few years that the connection and the connectivity in the airplanes will be so much better than now, that you could even be in a plane and be part of a meeting through a link. Why not? So the definition of, okay, so we need to choose, or that it should be a choice of more flying or more connectivity through other means, I don't think that's the case. It's both.
What about, so we're talking about, the experience, and we are expecting a lot more, aren't we? Passengers just want so much more, and places like Heathrow, it's become a shopping experience, and it's almost like part of it's no longer a place where you've just got to suffer and go through it. But can it improve even more, Simon? I know you're always looking, you're always innovating, but can it improve even more in, say, the short term, before we know what the next changes in technology are going to be?
Absolutely. So, the work that we're doing at the moment is to get people through quicker, slicker, and create that seamless experience. Initial analysis shows that we could probably we could reduce transaction times at different touch points by a third. Now that opens up a huge opportunity that says...
What kind of, sorry, just to pick up on that, what kind of touch points?
Well, reducing the time at check-in. So 2 years ago, Christmas time, one particular terminal, the average check-in time was about 15 minutes because it was a busy period. Actually, customers, they were quite happy. It was Christmas time. Christmas with bag drop, for example, 3 minutes. That creates a very different experience. You're getting people through quicker. Larger volumes, getting through quicker. Same level of security, but offering personalization as well, because you're effectively removing staff from being having to undertake repetitive administrative activities and transactions to providing service. So you can create a different experience to the customer. I think you're always going to have a level of shops, Heathrow's been award-winning for its shops for many years, but customers like that. People come because they want that experience. But I think the experience in the retail will change. And I think it will become more experiential. You'll see more technology, sort of virtual reality. Actually, as an organisation, as an airport, we're trying to create it more of a sense of place. And you want people to come because they want to come early, not because they feel that they've got to come. Again, as an industry, we've said for many years, you've got to be there 2 hours before, you've got to be there 3 hours before. Most journeys, that isn't true. So actually, how do we get the right balance that says, come through, come with certainty, be reassured that your journey will be slick, swift, etc. That goes back to the sharing of the data to make that a reality, so that you can get to a place that you can get them through quickly, but give them time to enjoy, and because it's part of their holiday. At the end of the day, we were talking earlier, people still like to travel because it's fun. And we shouldn't be trying to remove the fun aspect and making it a memorable experience.
Sebastian, is that something that you're hoping for then? That lead-up time, you must international flight, 3 hours, domestic 2 hours, is that something that you think can be squeezed? Because as Susan was saying, people are unreliable. Someone will inevitably get there late. The plane is held up. It's just human nature, isn't it? We're idiots.
In practice, it has. It has definitely improved a lot, but I think we're gonna have to. It's a must for this industry. I mean, if you look at the forecast in terms of passenger doubling over the next 20 years, the capacity at airport from our research will only increase by 5%. So if you wanna have, that many more passengers going through, only 5% more, there's a 20-to-1 ratio. So we have to become more efficient anyway. And actually, if you look at the impact of disruption in even more crowded airports, more busy sky, if we are not improving our efficiency, if we are not able to predict much more, thanks to data, disruptions, and handle them, that industry will not operate properly. So it's really a must. And technology, again, as we said, being there's no reason why we could not actually continue on that journey. Yeah. But just wanting to come back to one aspect to me that is quite illustrative of the gap we have between what we have available as a technology and where we are. Coming back to your application example, as a passenger, as a traveler, I've got one app here, one app there, and I think.
But I am an idiot when it comes to
but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, from our experience. When we deploy these days biometrics-based processing of passengers, some airports who are deploying the end-to-end journey, usually you have to deploy an airport app to enroll the passenger. Mm-hmm. So it's one more app. So again, I don't understand why we could not, as an industry, have a kind of plain vanilla application that gets customized and branded on the day of your travel with your airport and your airline, and so that's at least, for all these passengers who've got a smartphone, which is the big majority, as we know, we can actually simplify. So there are, I think, to me, little steps, technology that are not at all complex that we should be able to make, but that needs, again, alignment and collaboration throughout the
conversation.
Yeah, what I would say, too, is kind of, again, borrowing from other industries, this whole idea of super apps. And what big tech companies are doing to combine different things together in a super app is, I do think that's something that, as things go forward, people will look at how do you combine different things together, and how do you, again, use kind of the APIs and the ability to do that, to say, actually, I want to choose my super app to be X, and I want my super X to be Y, so you as a consumer can be in charge, but at the same point in time, you can have multiple apps together to control what you want to control together.
But it always goes back to the problem of security, Lean.
Yeah, and I think that we need to get some cultural changes in place as well, because it all comes down of organizing more on another place at the airport than the airport that you're flying from. So if you can do home enrollment, and you can support it with one platform for multiple airlines, for instance, you can do also more. All your security checks you can already do in advance. So you have to do less at the airport itself. But also the luggage, you can pick up the luggage at home. But up till now, we still, in our view, in our format, in our heads, it's still the link between the passenger and his suitcase. And if that's not there, we get aroused because that might be a security threat. And if we skip that, if we make sure that we can disconnect those two also in our systems, it would be more easy to pick up your luggage at home, and then you can have an easier passenger experience while traveling.
We're really talking about creating a personalized journey, and that means removing the one-size-fits-all approach that is largely today's journey to actually creating more that offers different options, whether it's home collection of your bag, enrollment in different ways. People won't come with one app for one airline, one app for another, one biometric. And actually, as an airport operator, I've therefore got to create infrastructure that works for all, that's common for all, and deals with that level of personalization. And that's challenging, but it's possible, and that's what we'll make happen.
Yeah, and what I would say is when you talk about these super apps, it could be your bank, it could be your airline, it could be a number of things together. When you look at even the digital ID, how good would that be if you can do that and share that? Wouldn't that make your life easier versus more complicated?
One final thought then, because we're coming up to the end of our time, but one thing that would help me is if you could create an app that would just do the packing for me as well. But I jest, but not really.
It's robots.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I have a packing robot.
I need
put away your clothes.
Yeah, they need to wash and find them first. But on a serious note, then, just in one sentence, what do you see in the short future? Because the long future changes are going to be so huge that I can't even see that far ahead. But in the short term, one thing that you think is tangible that can be done that you can see in the next 2 or 3 years. Simon, let's start with you.
I think the biometric journey is a reality in the next 2 years.
Okay, Sebastian.
I would say ACDM. I think it's one reality today, and we are deploying it in North America, and I think that could be deployed. It's basic data sharing, if you think about it, but it allows to better collaborate, anticipate issues, and I think that's something that we should be able to do in the next 3 years everywhere. Yeah.
Lean?
I think also the seamless journey, even through the different systems, that it would be possible in a few years to home enroll, travel through, do boarding crossings as well. Possibly with use of biometric data, but I think that in a few years it's possible.
I think the virtual reality, but not just for the customer, but everything in the airline. When you think of engineering and fixing the airplane and getting people in and out, I think it has a lot of really exciting ability for all of us in the future.
Well, I can feel by your enthusiasm and your excitement that something is going to change, and I look forward to that. I just don't want to be too old to enjoy it. So thank you so much to my esteemed panel, to Simon, to Sebastian, to Lena, and to Susan. Thank you so much for talking us through what we can expect in the foreseeable future. And no pressure, guys, but you're the guys that are going to make it happen. So we'll be watching. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.